going to do a quick demo using some of these techniques that we've been discussing, although not all of them, because it really doesn't work to try to use everything in one picture. This is an old grain elevator in Jamesport, Missouri that always caught my eye. So some of these techniques are really nice for urban things and buildings and that sort of thing. So we're going to give that a try. And just start out with a little bit of sky color. I'm using phthalo with a mixture of cobalt in it. And I'm going to paint around the shapes of the building with my flat brush. Which may or may not work, but we shall see. I want to have plenty of paint mixed up. Some of these, of course, I wouldn't need to paint around. I could just paint right over them because they'll be darker, but I think it'll work better like this. We shall hope anyway, because I'm going to want to do it quickly and come back in and suggest clouds for part of it. Whoops. When you miss what you're doing like that, you can just come right back in with your finger and push it out of the way. Okay, now I'm using a vignetted edge, which means it's a broken edge around the outside. But I'm going to lift some clouds with a damp Kleenex. Oops, and I'm going to get that off that area. And I don't have to do them just like they are in the photo. You are the artist and you can make your own decisions. As you can see, I'm using some of the damp paper towel or Kleenex to really lift those areas. And I've got a area over here that's going to want to make a background, so I've wrung out my brush and I'm lifting that. Okay. That's mostly how I want that to look. Maybe a few little puffy clouds here and there. Like this, like that. Oh, let's make this one bigger. Why not? And you can see that the blue is settling into the texture of the paper. That's really a pretty effect. Okay, we'll let that dry. That's nicely dried, and now I'm going to suggest some of the background trees. So I'm mixing up a very strong wash of burnt sienna and phthalo blue. That's one of my favorite dark greens. And I'll get this out of the way so I don't put my hand in it. And I'm just going to lay it in a broken wash here with a little bit of variation in it for interest. I've moved where the actual tree was somewhat from reality because I like the effect up here. Okay, I'm cutting in around the building, and because I like a little bit more of a broken texture there, I'm using my natural sponge to suggest some of the lacy foliage. And I'll do the same thing on this side, maybe with a little bit of quinacridone gold in this side. And I'm again moving the tree up somewhat because I want it to frame the building more. We don't have to do exactly what we see. Perfectly okay to make our decisions and let the picture speak for us or to us. Again, let's get a little bit more variation in there for interest. Added a little bit more of the gold. And down here, a little bit more of the blue. And again, just a bit of laciness. I don't want to get carried away with that because it can look tricky and we don't want that. Okay, let's see. This is going to puddle, I believe, and I don't really want that. So I'm lifting a little bit where it's wettest. And now I'm going to draw some of this, literally, draw some of this out with a pencil and scratch into that wet wash to suggest some of the bare branches that I'm seeing, dragging some of the paint up into the sky for a lacy effect. And of course, if I want a lighter tree trunk here, I can scrape it back like that, because this is starting to lose its shine here. And then I can come back in and suggest some of the broken area. Okay, don't want to get carried away. Remind myself, do not want to get carried away. Y'all can remind me. Okay, I'm going to let that dry. Actually, I decided to come back in while this is still damp and lift just a little bit of a foliagey look with my Kleenex. Oh, that worked. I like that. I've cleaned my palette again and mixed up a fair amount of raw sienna and a bit of burnt sienna to warm it. I'm pushing the colors a little bit for the brick part of the building because it'll be livelier. So, laying those in, and I really want it to suggest sunshine. Okay. And then this area is all the same warm brick color, and I'm vignetting the front edge again too. I don't feel the need to paint it all right down to the edges of the paper. This kind of invites the viewer in. Oops, well, I goofed. And so we'll just blot that back because the building is different over here. I'm going to come back in with a little tonal variation here and there, even though you don't really see it in the building because it's more interesting. Oops. Just drop in a little jewel of burnt sienna. And let's tilt the paper a little bit to let that run. Yeah, that's livelier than trying to do exact match. Okay, and let's give it a little bit of texture with the wax paper. I'm going to wad it because I liked that effect before. And I think I'll probably just do that on this part. So bending it back away from the rounded part. And we'll spatter in a bit. Oops. Somehow I got more green. Oh dear. Didn't want that. Well, we'll clean the palette again. Peppy the cat is wanting in. You can probably hear him scratching on the window. Okay, I'm going to do some serious splatters here. And they got in my sky, so I can blot those right up. Again, vignetting that edge. And you can tap like that to make spatters. And they do kind of go every place, but that's okay. We don't care. Makes it interesting. It's especially okay in the building itself. Now, a little bit of clear water tapped into that will give an interesting texture. See here? That's rather nice. If you get something where you really don't want it, you can come in with your clear water and give it a shot. Wait a minute, let's make a big one so you can see it. Okay, say I didn't want that there. Come in with your clear water and lift it almost completely away. That'll be interesting. And while I'm at it, why don't I blot a little bit here and there with a Kleenex for variation. Okay. I'm liking this, and I hope you are too. You can always protect areas that you don't want to get spattered with your hand or with a piece of paper like this. That seems to work well. If you want to suggest some more linear trees, you can use the sharpened end of your brush like this and just add a few more branches. I'm not going to get carried away. Once again, and then blot a little for variation. That's more interesting. Now, we'll lay in some shadows. And I'll use a bit of cobalt blue to cool them. And come up under the edge of the brickwork here. And just let it follow the curve of the building. Need a little more blue, don't you think? Okay. Again, I'm pushing the color because I want it to be bold. And there's some underneath this eave, all the way to the edge. And let's introduce a little reflected light up in here, just for interest and liveliness. Same here. And we'll lift this big puddle a bit so it doesn't back run once again. Okay. Now each one of these little stair steps is going to need a shadow. So I'll lay those in now. These are actually tiles on a kind of roof line. And I'm going to do them quickly because I don't want to get carried away. But that kind of livens it up a bit. Now this little bit of industrial business also has this same curve to it. So I'm using the same shadow and allowing it to suggest the curve of that. It's a slightly different color from the rest of it, so I'm going to accentuate that a bit. Okay, that works. Now we'll let that dry. As you can see, I've come back in and added a little warm color here, a suggestion of the curve of the bricks here, the little shadows under the tiles there, and these interesting windows that this building has. So we'll allow that to dry and then jump right back in. The slanted parts of the building here well, on one side they are, looks like galvanized metal, and on the other side partly a lighter brick and partly galvanized, and I like the effect of the galvanized, so we're just going to go with that on both sides, just to kind of pull this together. And I'm going to use my sharpened end again here to suggest the lines in the galvanized siding rather than worry about painting them. Sometimes a tooled effect like this is very interesting and rather fresher. I'm going to add a bit of shadow underneath the overhang while it's still quite wet, and that'll blend nicely, and it's more bold. Okay, now while I've got a good strong color here, I'm going to take a chance of painting the roof and see if I can keep my hand out of my paints. It's got to be quite bold though, because it needs to be darker than the sky. So here we go, hang on. Just this little bit of turret up here has the rounded roof, and I'm going to blot just a bit to give it a little sense of direction, and come back in and do a little of my scraping. Maybe blot just a wee bit more. There. That keeps it looking round. Okay, try that. As you can see, I've come back in and added the window panes here and a bit of shadow there. And now I'm going to do the lighter roof on this section. Again, let's liven it up a little bit, make it brighter than it is in reality, but maybe not quite that bright. We'll spread that cobalt blue around a bit. It's kind of an interesting gray color, but gray doesn't have to mean light black, obviously. Okay, let's blot it just slightly there like we did on the other. And come back in under the edge. I think my silly neighbor cat wants in, but he cannot have it. Not right now. Okay, that works. Now, let's see if we can finish this up pretty quickly. The roofs are a lighter green, so I'll do them first. I'm using a flat brush here to kind of maintain that square angle. But the neat thing is that it doesn't matter if you use the same green overall, because I will be coming back in and making shadow areas. So I'm just going to make this mostly one big simple shape, which is fairly easy to do with a flat brush. Again, using a little variation in color for interest. And a little warmer color on the what will be the roof. But again, a little variation in it for interest. And it also has some lines in it So I'm going to use the end of my brush for those. Just a few to suggest. And remember to include perspective in your figuring. Okay. A little bit more variation. Ooh, that's pretty. And I'm going to let that dry. Now we're going to try for those nice, deep, rich shadow areas on the green. And then we'll be just about done with this. Ooh, my, that was a full brush. There's a little variation. I'm not sure exactly why, because you can't see it clearly, but a little variation in the shape. And then this will be a little tricky. This needs to bleed off a bit to indicate the roundness. And we'll suggest a few of the brick shapes also to suggest the roundness. And come back in with the dark here. And this kind of comes across and meets there. Oops. Didn't quite nail that, so we shall just move it. And then under the edge of the roof, the dark shadow. Actually, this whole area should have been darker, so I'm going to just suggest that now. And we'll still need a darker shadow. This comes on out just a bit. And there's a darker edge along here. And a shadow under the window ledge. Oops. Once again got my hand in the paint. Not exactly the first time ever. I'm just going to come back and make this a softer shadow then under the edge. And see if I can't refine this just a bit while it's still good and wet. It's quite angular, really. Okay, and then there's just a bit of connection here. And a very dark window here. It's going to blend a bit so it's not so rigid. And you can see the edge of another window here, so I'm adding a little bit more of that. And if I can just get this fine enough. Not exactly sure what it is. It's sort of a lightning rod, but I'm not entirely sure. Adding some of the bricks in that area. And we'll let that dry. As you can see, I've come back in and added the dark window panes, a little bit more shadow here, a little bit more detail on the roof, and I'm going to call it done.